Welcome back to Major Intonio's presentation of My Autobiography by Benito Mussolini. Chapter 9, Thus We Took Rome.
And now we were on the eve of the historic march on the Eternal City. Having completed my survey and estimate of conditions in the provinces, having listened to the reports of the various chiefs of the Black Shirts, having selected the plans of action, and having determined, in a general way, upon the most favorable moment, I called together in Florence the chiefs of the Fascist movement and of the squads of action. There were Michele Bianchi, De Bono, Italo Balbo, Giuriati, and various others. Someone at that quiet conference suggested the mobilization of the Black Shirts for November 4th, the anniversary of the victory. I rejected that proposal, for it would have spoiled a day of commemoration by introducing the element of revolutionary activity. It was necessary to give our movement the full advantage of opportunity and to make it spark and detonate. It was necessary to weigh, besides the military aspects, the political effects and values. We had to consider, finally, the painful possibility of a violent suppression or a failure spreading from some slip to all of our plans. We were obliged to determine beforehand all the hows and whens, the details of the means, with what men and with what aims the fascist assault could most wisely be launched. The fascist meeting in Naples, which was advertised as our second great Congress, with its display of discipline and of speech-making, served to hide the beginnings of the real mobilization. At a fixed moment, the squads of action of all Italy were to be in arms. They would have to occupy the vital nerve centers, the cities and the post offices, the prefectures, police headquarters, railroad stations, and military barracks. Detachments of fascisti were to march along the Tyrrhenian Sea toward Rome, led by chiefs, all of them brave former officers. The same movement was to take place on the Adriatic side, from which direction was to be launched on Rome the strength of the low Romagna, Marche, and Abruzzi districts. That plan required that we should free Ancona from the social communist dominion. This had been done. From Middle Italy, the squadrons already mobilized for the meeting at Naples were also to be directed upon Rome. They were supported by groups of fascist cavalry under the command of Caradonna. The moment the fascist mobilization and campaign was decided and actually began operation, martial law, the stern rules and orders of fascism, both for officers and privates, were to be enforced. The political powers of our national directorate were turned over to a military quadrumvirate of action in the persons of Generals De Bono, De Vecchi, Italo Balbo, and Michele Bianchi. I presided over the quadrumvirate, and I was the Duce, the leader, and had the ultimate responsibility for the work of the four men, a responsibility for which I was fully pledged not only to the fascisti, but to Italy. We selected as general concentration headquarters the town of Perugia, capital of Umbria, where many roads flow to a center and from which it is easy to reach Rome. In case of military and political failure, we could, by crossing the Apennine Range, retire to the valley of the Po. In any revolutionary movement of history, that zone has always been properly considered the keystone of any situation. There our domination was absolute and undisputed. We selected the watchword, we fixed the details of the action. Everything had to be reported to me, in the offices of the Popolo d'Italia. Trusted fascist messengers wove webs like scurrying spiders. All day long I was issuing the necessary orders. I wrote the proclamation, which was to be addressed to the country on the eve of action. We knew from very faithful, unforgettable friends that the army, unless exceptional circumstances arose, would maintain itself on a ground of amiable neutrality. At the historic Congress at Naples, after my opening speech, which traced the outlines of the fascist action in the state and assigned to Naples the title Queen of the Mediterranean, the general discussion continued in academic tone, without a definite aim except that of gaining time. The leader in that dissembling and sham discussion was Michele Bianchi, one of the quadrumvirate for the march on Rome. At that time, he had already revealed a notable political mind. De Bono and Balbo, who had great authority over the squadrons of action, joined the general headquarters in Perugia. I went from the adjourned Congress back to Milan. During the trip, I had an opportunity to see many friends and to make additional preparations. I had important conversations regarding that particular drive, which had to be organized in Milan, as in other centers of the Lombardy district. In order not to arouse the suspicion of the police, for I was always surrounded by spies, I assumed the attitude of an indifferent person without a worry or trouble in the world. This was somewhat difficult, for I had to spend precious time in trying the speed of a new car and in other workaday comings and goings. In the evenings, I went to the theaters. I pretended to have a great spirit of activity in my editorial writing and newspaper management. But suddenly, when I knew that everything was ready, I issued from Milan, through the Popolo d'Italia, by means of independent publications, and through the correspondence of all the Italian newspapers, my proclamation of revolution. It had been signed by the quadrumvirate. Here is the text of the memorable document. Fascisti, Italians, the time for determined battle has come. 4 years ago at this season, the National Army loosed the final offensive which brought it to victory. Today, the army of the black shirts again takes possession of that victory, which has been mutilated, and going directly to Rome, brings victory again to the glory of that capital. From now on, Principi and Triari are mobilized. The martial law of fascism now becomes a fact. By order of the Deuce, all the military, political, and administrative functions of the party management are taken over by a secret quadrumvirate of action with dictatorial powers. The army, the reserve and safeguard of the nation, must not take part in this struggle. Fascism renews its highest homage given to the army of Vittorio Veneto. Fascism, furthermore, does not march against the police, but against a political class both cowardly and imbecile, which in 4 long years has not been able to give a government to the nation. Those who form the productive class must know that fascism wants to impose nothing more than order and discipline upon the nation and to help to raise the strength which will renew progress and prosperity. The people who work in the fields and in the factories, those who work in the railroads or in offices, have nothing to fear from the fascist government. Their just rights will be protected. We will even be generous with unarmed adversaries. Fascism draws its sword to cut the multiple Gordian knots which tie and burden Italian life. We call God and the spirit of our 500,000 dead to witness that only one impulse sends us on, that only one passion burns within us, the impulse and the passion to contribute to the safety and greatness of our country. Fascisti of all Italy, stretch forth like Romans your spirits and your sinews. We must win. We will. Long live Italy. Long live fascism, the quadrumvirate. At night, there reached me the first news of bloody clashes in Cremona, Alessandria, and Bologna, and of the assaults on munition factories and upon military barracks. I had composed my proclamation in a very short and resounding form. It had impressed the whole of the Italian people. Our life was suddenly brought into an ardent atmosphere of revolution. News of the struggles that were taking place in the various cities, sometimes exaggerated by the imaginations of reporters, gave a dramatic touch to the revolution. Responsible elements of the country asserted that as a result of this movement, there would at last be a government able to rule and to command respect. The great mass of the population, however, looked out astonished, as it were, from their windows. None of the subversive or liberal chiefs showed himself. All went into their holes, inspired only by fear. They understood quite thoroughly that this was the striking of our hour. Everyone felt sure that the struggle of fascism would have a victorious outcome. I could sense this even from far away. The air was full of it, the wind spoke of it, the rain brought it down, the earth drank it in. I put on the black shirt, I barricaded the Popolo d'Italia. In the livid and gray morning, Milan had a new and fantastic appearance. Pauses and sudden silences gave one the sensation of certain great hours that come and go in the course of history. Frowning battalions of royal guards scouted the city, and the monotonous rhythm of their feet sounded ominous echoes in the almost deserted streets. The public services functioned on a reduced and meager scale. The assaults of the fascisti against the barracks and on the post offices were cause for fusillades of shots, which gave to the city a sinister echo of civil war. I had provided the offices of my newspaper with everything needful for defense against attack. I knew that if the government authorities desired to give a proof of their strength, they would have directed their first violent assault at the Popolo d'Italia. In fact, in the early hours of the morning, I saw trained upon the offices and upon me the ugly muzzles of the mitrailleuses. There was a rapid exchange of shots. I had my rifle charged and went down to defend the doors. The neighbors had barricaded entrances and windows and were begging for protection. During the firing, bullets whistled around my ears. A major of the Royal Guard finally asked for a truce in order to talk with me. After a brief initial conversation, we agreed that the Royal Guard should withdraw as far as 200 meters and that the mitrailleuses were to be removed from the middle of the street and placed at a crossing of the street, about 100 meters away. With that sort of armistice began for me the day of October 28th. At night, a group of deputies, senators, and political men of Milan, the best-known and most responsible figures of the Lombard parliamentary world, among whom were Senators Conti, Crespi, and the Deputy de Capitani, came to the offices of the Popolo d'Italia to ask me to desist from a struggle which they asserted would be the beginning of a violent, grave, and reprehensible civil war. They proposed to me a sort of armistice and a truce with the central government. Perhaps a ministerial crisis might save, they said, the situation and the country. I smiled back at the parliamentarians because of their innocence. I answered them in words like these: "Dear sirs, there is not the slightest question of any partial or total crisis or of substitution of one ministry for another. The game I have undertaken has a wider and more serious character. For 3 years we have lived in a cauldron boiling with small battles and devastations. This time I will not lay down weapons until a full victory is concluded. It is time to change the direction not only of the government, but also of the whole of Italian life. There is no question of a struggle of parties in Parliament, but here is a question. We want to know if we Italians are able to live an autonomous life or are to be slaves of our own weakness, not only toward foreign nations, but also in our own affairs. War is declared. We will carry it to the bitter end. Do you see these communications? Well, the struggle is blazing all over Italy. Youth is in arms. I am rated as a leader who precedes and not one who follows. I will not humiliate with arbitration this page of the marvelous resurrection of Italian youth. I tell you that it is the last chapter. It will fulfill the traditions of our country. It cannot die in a compromise." I then showed my visitors a letter, which I had received at dawn from Commander Gabriele D'Annunzio. I had sent a brief message to the Redeemer of Fiume, who had been with us since the first moments of the darkest struggle. It was brought to him by the generals Giampietro and Dohet and Eugenio Coselsci. D'Annunzio, toward whom some vague hopes of the politicians had vainly turned, had immediately answered in these terms, quote, "Dear Mussolini, I received tonight the 3 messengers after a hard day of work. In this book, so many times interrupted, are gathered the truths that the one-eyed man discovers in retirement and meditation. I think that Italian youth must now recognize them and follow them with purified heart. It is necessary to gather together all the sincere forces and start them toward the great goals that are fixed for Italy by her eternal destinies. From virile patience and not from restless impatience will salvation come to us. The messengers will tell you my thoughts and my intentions, free from all vague colorings. The king knows that I am still the most faithful and eager soldier of Italy. Let him stand against the adverse destinies, which must be faced and defeated. Victory has the light eyes of Pallas. Do not blindfold her. Sine strage vincit, strepitu sine ullo. Gabriele D'Annunzio." Unquote. After having read the letter of D'Annunzio to these Lombard politicians, I sent them away with the declaration that if I was left with only one man, or indeed all alone, I would not abandon the fight until I had obtained the final decisive ends, as I had outlined them to my associates. The logical clearness, the stout, rigorous, coherent reasons I had given impressed those who had come to offer conciliation, compromise, concessions. I think that one of them must have immediately sped off to inform the Premier, Facta, that nothing could be done with me. Poor Facta, instead of being preoccupied with his shortcomings, was wondering how and to whom he could announce this real crisis among the sham crises. The chamber was closed at that time. Where could he turn? Anyone can see that in all events, even in solemn events, the grotesque and the ludicrous are always to be found, and sometimes prosper under the very shadow of great and tragic happenings. The last of the liberal governments of Italy wanted to make its final gesture. It addressed to the country a declaration phrased in the following terms, quote, "Seditious manifestations are appearing in some of the Italian provinces, brought about in such a way as to hamper the normal functioning of the powers of the state, and are of such nature as to throw the country into serious trouble. The government has tried its utmost to reach an agreement, with the hope of bringing back peace to all minds and to assure a peaceful solution of the crisis. Facing, however, a revolutionary attempt, it has the duty of maintaining public order by any means and at any price. Even though its resignations have been presented, it will fulfill this duty for the safety of citizens and the safety of free constitutional institutions. Meanwhile, the citizens must maintain their calm and must have faith in the measures of public security that have been adopted. Long live Italy, long live the King." Signed, Facta, Chancer, Amendola, Taddei, Alessio, Bertone, Paratore, Soleri, De Vito, Anile, Riccio, Bertini, Rossi, Delos Barba, Fulci, Luciani, unquote. At the same time, the ministers, considering the situation created in the country, put their portfolios at the disposition of the president of the council, Facta. This man sought advice from several friends in Rome. As a result, he offered a decree to proclaim martial law, which the king, in his profound wisdom, flatly refused to sign. The sovereign understood that the revolution of the black shirts was the conclusion of 3 years of struggle and of fighting. He understood that only with the victory of one party could we reach pacification and that order and progress in civil life which are essential to the harmony of the Italian people. Out of respect for the most orthodox constitutional forms, the king allowed Facta to follow the rules of the Constitution. We had then resignations, designations, consultations, communications, charges, and so on and so on. At this moment came a sinister maneuver that impressed me as being ominous. The National Party of the Right, which had a great similarity of outlook with the Fascisti, although it had not the same system of campaign, advanced some singular claims by means of emissaries. The National Right asserted, in fact, that it was the keystone of the situation. Salandra, who was the most typical representative of the group, was disposed to sacrifice himself and to take upon his back the cross of power. This was to be understood as an aid for the Fascisti. I protested energetically against such a solution, which would have perpetuated compromise and error. Fascism was under arms. It was dominating the centers of national life. It had a very well-defined aim. It had followed deliberately an extra-parliamentary path, and it could not allow its victory to be mutilated or adulterated in such a manner. That was my exact answer to the mediators of the union between the National Right and fascism. No compromise. The struggle continued with the objectives I had mapped out. It is impossible in the pages of an autobiography to present the entire picture of the revolutionary events in those days. I distinctly remember that with every hour that passed, I had more poignantly the sensation of triumphantly dominating the Italian political situation. The adversaries were confused, scattered, speechless. The fascisti in compact files were already near the gates of Rome and were expecting me to go to the head of their military formations to march with them into the capital. On the afternoon of the 29th, I received a very urgent telephone call from Rome on behalf of the Quirinal. General Cittadini, first aide-de-camp of His Majesty the King, asked me very kindly to go to Rome because the King, having examined the situation, wanted to charge me with forming a ministry. I thanked General Cittadini for his kindness, but I asked him to give me the same communication by telegram. One knows that the telephone may play dirty tricks at times. General Cittadini, after having first objected that my request was not usual under the court regulations, took into consideration the abnormal and informal situation and agreed to send me the same invitation by telegram. In fact, after a few hours, an urgent message arrived. It was of a personal character. This was it. On. Mussolini, Milan. His Majesty the King asks you to come immediately to Rome, for he wishes to offer you the responsibility of forming a ministry. With respect, General Cittadini. This was not yet victory, but the progress made was considerable. I communicated directly with the headquarters of the revolution in Perugia and with the various commands of the Black Shirts in Milan. I gave out, by means of an extra edition of the Popolo d'Italia, the news of the command I had received. I was in a terrible state of nervous tension. Night after night, I had been kept awake, giving orders, following the compact columns of the Fascisti, restricting the battle to the nightly practices of fascism. A period of greater responsibilities was about to begin for me. I must not fail in my duty or in my aims. I gathered all my strength to my aid. I invoked the memory of the dead. I asked the assistance of God. I called upon the faithful living to assist me in the great task that confronted me. That night of October 31st, 1922, I left the direction of the Popolo d'Italia and turned my fighting journal over to my brother, Arnaldo. In the number of November 1st, I published the following declaration, quote, "From now on, the direction of the Popolo d'Italia is entrusted to Arnaldo Mussolini. I thank and salute with brotherly love all the editors, collaborators, correspondents, employees, workers, all those who have assiduously and faithfully labored with me for the life of this paper and for love of our country. Rome, October 30th, 1922. Mussolini," unquote. I parted with regret from the paper that had been the most constant and potent factor in our victory. I must add that my brother, Arnaldo, has been able to maintain the editorship with dignity and capacity. When I had entrusted the paper to my brother, I was off for Rome. To the zealous people who wanted to get me a special train to go to Rome to confer with the king, I said that for me a compartment in the usual train was quite enough. Engines and coal should not be wasted. Economize. That is the first and acid test of a true man of government. And after all, I could only enter Rome at the head of my black shirts, then camping at Santa Marinella in the atmosphere and the shining rays of the capital. The news of my departure sped all over Italy. In every station where the train stopped, I found a gathering of the fascisti and of the masses who wanted to bring me, even through the pouring rain, their cheers and their goodwill. Leaving Milan was painful. That city had given me a home for 10 years. To me, it had been prodigal in the satisfaction it had afforded. It had supported me in every stress. It had baptized the most wonderful squads of action of fascism. It had been the scene of historical political struggles. Now I was leaving it, called by destiny and by a greater task. All Milan knew of my going, and I felt that even in the feeling of joy for a departure that was a symbol of victory, there was also a shade of sadness. But this was not the hour for sentimentality. It was the time for quick, sure decisions. After the kisses and farewells of my family, I said goodbye to many prominent Milanese, and then I went away, speeding into the night, to take counsel with myself, to refresh my soul, to listen to the echoes of voices of friends, and to envisage the wide horizons of tomorrow's possibilities. The minor episodes of that trip and of those days are not important. The train brought me into the midst of the fascisti. I was in view of Rome at Santa Marinella. I reviewed the columns. I established the formalities for the entrance into Rome. I established connections between the quadriumvirate and the authorities. My presence redoubled the great enthusiasm. I read in the eyes of those young men the divine smile of triumph of an ideal. With such support, I would have felt inspired to challenge, if need be, not only the base Italian ruling class, but enemies of any sort and race. In Rome, an indescribable welcome awaited me. I did not want any delay. Even before making contacts with my political friends, I motored to the Quirinal. I wore a black shirt. I was introduced without formalities into the presence of His Majesty the King. The Stefani Agency and the great newspapers of the world gave stilted or speculative details about this interview. I will limit myself, for obvious reasons of reserve, to declare that the conference was characterized by great cordiality. I concealed no plans, nor did I fail to make plain my ideas of how to rule Italy. I obtained the sovereign's approbation. I took up lodgings at the Savoy Hotel and began to work. First, I made arrangements with the general command of the army to bring militia into Rome and to have them defile in proper formation in a review before the king. I gave detailed and precise orders. 100,000 black shirts paraded in perfect order before the sovereign. They brought to him the homage of fascist Italy. I was then triumphant and in Rome. I killed at once all unnecessary demonstrations in my honor. I gave orders that not a single parade should take place without the permission of the General Fascist Command. It was necessary to give to everybody from the first moment a stern and rigid sense of discipline in line with the regime that I had conceived. I discouraged every manifestation on the part of army officers who wanted to bring me their plaudits. I have always considered the army outside and above every kind of politics. The army must, in my opinion, be inspired by absolute and conscientious discipline. It must devote itself with the deepest will only to the defense of frontiers and of historical rights. The army is an institution which must be preserved inviolate. It must not suffer the slightest loss in its integrity and in its high dedication. But other and more complex problems surged about me at that moment. I was in Rome, not only with the duty of composing a new ministry, I had also firmly decided to renew and rebuild from the very bottom the life of the Italian people. I vowed to myself that I would impel it toward higher and more brilliant aims. Rome sharpened my sense of dedication. The Eternal City, Caput Mundi, has two courts and two diplomacies. It has seen in the course of centuries imperial armies defeated under its walls. It has witnessed the decay of the strong and the rise of universal waves of civilization and of thought. Rome, the coveted goal of princes and leaders, the universal city, heir to the old empire and the power of Christianity. Rome welcomed me as leader of national legions, as a representative, not of a party or a group, but of a great faith and of an entire people. I had long meditated my action as a man of party and as a man of government. I had carried these thoughts as I walked by day and even as I slept by night. I had won and could win more. I could have nailed my enemies to the wall, not only metaphorically, but in very fact if I had wished. Those enemies who had slandered fascism and those whom I hated for having betrayed Italy in peace as they had betrayed her in war. The atmosphere was pregnant with the possibility of tragedy. I had mobilized 300,000 black shirts. They were waiting for my signal to move. They could be used for one purpose or another. I had in the capital 60,000 armed men ready for action. The march on Rome could have set tragic fires. It might have spilled much blood if it had followed the example of ancient and modern revolutions. This was for me a moment in which it was more necessary than ever to examine the field with calm serenity and with cold reason, to compare the immediate and the distant results of our daring action when directed toward definite aims. I could have proclaimed a dictatorship. I could have formed a dictatorial ministry composed solely of fascisti on the type of the directory that was formed in France at the time of the convention. The fascist revolution, however, had its unique characteristics. It had no antecedent in history. It was different from any other revolution also in its capacity to re-enter, with deliberate intent, legal, established traditions and forms. For that reason also, I knew that the mobilization should last the shortest possible time. I did not forget that I had a parliament on my hands, a chamber of deputies of sullen mind, ready to lay traps for me, accustomed to an old tradition of ambiguity and intrigue, full of grudges, repressed only by fear, a dismayed Senate from which I could obtain a disciplined respect, but not an eager and productive collaboration. The Crown was looking on to see what I would do, following constitutional rules. The pontificate followed the events with anxiety. The other nations looked at the revolution suspiciously, if not with hostility. Foreign banks were anxious for news. Exchange wavered. Credit was still vacillating, waiting for the situation to be cleared. It was indispensable, first of all, to give the impression of stability to the new regime. I had to see, oversee, and foresee everything. I slept not at all for some nights, but they were nights fecund in action and ideas. The measures that immediately followed in the first 24 hours of my government bear witness. Another problem arose from the character of the revolution. Every revolution has in it, besides the great mass of human impact and the conscientious and unselfish leaders, two other types, adventurers and melancholic intellectuals who might be called, by a synthetic expression, ascetics of revolution. When the revolution is over, the mass, which often is moved by the simple intuition of a great historical and social reality, goes peacefully back to its usual activities. It forms the laborious and disciplined leaven of the new regime. The conscientious and unselfish leaders form the necessary aristocracy of rulers. But the ascetics and the adventurers are a dead burden. The first would like to see overnight a perfect humanity without faults. They do not understand that there is no revolution that can change the nature of men. Because of their utopian illusions, the ascetics are never contented. They waste their time and other men's energies in sophistry and doubts just when it is necessary to work like fiends in order to go forward. The adventurers always identify the fortune of the revolution with their own fortune. They hope to gain personal advantage from the victory, and they harbor resentment when their wishes are not satisfied and clamor for extreme and dangerous measures. Now I had to defend the fascist victory from the ascetics and the adventurers. The adventurers, however, sank rapidly in the fascist revolution because it was different and on a higher plane than any other revolution. But I felt it my constant duty to examine and to ponder, in such a grave moment, every step I made. First of all, in the pressure of events, I desired to assure regularity to the country and to constitute a new government. Order came quickly. There were only a few sporadic incidents of violence, inevitable under such conditions. I felt the necessity of safeguarding Facta, and I called 10 black shirts who had each been much decorated for bravery for the purpose of accompanying Facta to Pinerolo, his native town, under their word of honor. They kept their promise. Nobody, that was the order, should touch a hair, mock or humiliate Facta. He had given to the country his only son, who died in an airplane accident during the war, and Facta deserved respect for that and more. I forbade reprisals against the leaders of the oppositions. It was only by my great authority that I averted the destruction, not only rhetorical but also actual, of my most rabid enemies. I saved their skins for them. At the same time, in the space of a few hours, I constituted a new ministry. I discarded, as I said, the idea of a fascist dictatorship because I wanted to give to the country the impression of a normal life free from the selfish exclusiveness of a party. That sense of instinct for equilibrium accompanies me fortunately in the gravest, the most strenuous, and the most critical moments. I decided then, after having weighed everything, to compose a ministry of a nationalist character. I have had the feeling, as I had then, that later there would become inevitable a process of clarification, but I preferred that it should come forth spontaneously from the succeeding political events. But that was the last generous gesture that I ever made toward the old Italian ring of parties and politicians. In the new ministry, among ministers and undersecretaries of state, were 15 fascisti, 3 nationalists, 3 liberals of the right, 6 popolari, and 3 social democrats. I was generous toward the liberals of the right, whose peculiar maneuver in order to pick up for their profit the results of the fascist revolution had been quite recent. Among the popolari and social democrats, I selected those who gave promise of national spirit and who did not intrigue with subversive popularism or with socialism. I kept for myself, with the presidency of the council, the office of the interior, and assumed ad interim that of foreign affairs. I gave to Armando Diaz the ministry of war, and I promised to give him an army worthy of the country and the victor of Vittorio Veneto. I called Admiral Town de Revel for the Navy and Federzoni for the colonies. The complete formation of the ministry was as follows: Benito Mussolini, Deputy, Presidency of the Council, Domestic and Interim of Foreign Affairs, Fascist. Armando Diaz, General of the Army, War. Paolo Town de Revel, Admiral, Senator, Navy. Luigi Federzoni, Deputy, Colonies, Nationalist. Aldo Oviglio, Deputy, Justice, Fascist. Alberto De Stefani, Deputy, Finances, Fascist. Vincenzo Tangora, Deputy, Treasury, Popolare. Giovanni Gentile, Professor, Public Instruction, Liberal of the Right. Gabriello Carnazza, Deputy, Public Works, Democrat. Giuseppe De Capitani, Deputy, Agriculture, Liberal of the Right. Teofilo Rossi, Senator, Industry and Commerce, Democrat. Stefano Cavazzoni, Deputy, Work and Social Providence, Popolare. Giovanni Colonna de Cesaro, Deputy, Posts and Telegraphs, Social Democrat. Giovanni Giuriotti, Deputy, Liberated Provinces, Fascist. Under-Secretaries of State Presidency, Giacomo Asherbo, Deputy, Fascist. Domestic, Aldo Finzi, Deputy, Fascist. Foreign, Ernesto Vassallo, Deputy, Popolare. War, Carlo Bernardi, Deputy, Social Democrat. Navy, Costanzo Ciano, Deputy, Fascist. with the Commissariat of Commercial Marine. Treasury, Alfredo Rocco, Deputy Nationalist. Military Assistance, Cesare Maria De Vecchi, Deputy Fascist. Finances, Pietro Liscia, Deputy Social Democrat. Colonies, Giovanni Marchi, Deputy Liberal of the Right. Liberated Provinces, Umberto Merlin, Deputy Popolare. Justice, Fulvio Milani, Deputy Popolare. Instruction, Dario Lupi, Deputy Fascist. Fine Arts, Luigi Siciliani, Deputy Nationalist. Agriculture, Ottavio Corgini, Deputy Fascist. Public Works, Alessandro Sardi, Deputy Fascist. Post and Telegraph, Michele Terzaghi, Deputy Fascist. Industry and Commerce, Granci Giovanni, Deputy Popolare. Labor and Social Providence, Silvio Guy, Deputy Fascist. When the ministry was completed, I wrote the following paper of demobilization, signed by the Quadrumvirate, quote, Fascisti of all Italy. Our movement has been rewarded by victory. The leader of our party has assumed the political powers of the state, both for domestic and for foreign affairs. Our government, while it consecrates our triumph with the names of those who were its creators on land and sea, assembles, with the purpose of national pacification, men from the other parties, because they are attached to the cause of the nation. The Italian fascism is too intelligent to desire a greater victory. Fascisti, the supreme quadrumvirate of action, turning back its powers to the direction of the party, salutes you for your marvelous proof of courage and discipline. You have shown your merit in the future of the country. Disperse in the same perfect order in which you gathered for the great trial, destined, we firmly believe, to open a new epoch in Italian history. Go back to your usual work, because Italy now needs to work peacefully to reach its better day. Nothing must trouble the powerful stride of the victory that we won in these days of proud passion and sovereign magnitude. Long live Italy, long live fascism. The Quadrumvirate. Unquote. Then I sent a telegram to D'Annunzio, and I distributed an energetic circular to all the prefects of the kingdom and to the lesser authorities. The telegram to D'Annunzio said, Assuming the hard task of giving discipline and internal peace to the nation, I send to you, Commander, my affectionate greetings for you and for the destinies of the country. The valiant fascist youth which gives back a soul to the nation will not blindfold victory. Mussolini. The text of the circular sent to office holders was the following. From today, entrusted with the confidence of His Majesty the King, I undertake the direction of the government of the country. I demand that all authorities, from the highest to the least, discharge their duties with intelligence and with complete regard for the supreme interests of the country. I will set the example. The President of the Council and Ministry of the Interior. Signed, Mussolini. Finally, I announced for November the 16th a meeting of the Chamber of Deputies to render an account of what I had done and to announce my intentions and program. It was an exceptional meeting. The hall was filled to overflowing. Every deputy was present. My declarations were brief, clear, energetic. I left no misunderstanding. I stated sharply the rights of revolution. I called the attention of the audience to the fact that only by the will of fascism had the revolution remained within the boundaries of legality and tolerance. I could have made, I said, of this dull and gray hall a bivouac for corpses. I could have nailed up the doors of Parliament and have established an exclusively fascist government. I could have done those things, but, at least for a time, I did not do them. I then thanked all my collaborators and pointed with sympathy to the multitude of Italian laborers who had aided the fascist movement with their active or passive solidarity. I did not present one of the usual programs that the past ministries used to present, for these solved the problems of the country only on paper. I asserted my will to act and to act without delaying for useless oratory. In the field of foreign politics, I squarely declared the intention of following a policy of dignity and national utility. On every subject, I made weighty declarations that showed how fascism had already been able to assay and analyze and solve varying and urgent problems and to fix the future outlines of government. Finally, I concluded, Gentlemen, from further communications, you will know the fascist program in its details. I do not want, so long as I can avoid it, to rule against the chamber, but the chamber must feel its own position. That position opens the possibility that it may be dissolved in 2 days or in 2 years. We ask full powers because we want to assume full responsibility. Without full powers, you know very well that we couldn't save 1 lira. I say 1 lira. We do not want to exclude the possibility of voluntary cooperation, for we will cordially accept it if it comes from deputies, senators, or even from competent private citizens. Every one of us has a religious sense of our difficult task. The country cheers us and waits. We will give it not words but facts. We formally and solemnly promise to restore the budget to health, and we will restore it. We want to make a foreign policy of peace, but at the same time, one of dignity and steadiness. We will do it. We intend to give the nation a discipline. We will give it. Let none of our enemies of yesterday, of today, of tomorrow cherish illusions in regard to our permanence in power. Foolish and childish illusions like those of yesterday. Our government has a formidable foundation in the conscience of the nation. It is supported by the best, the newest Italian generations. There is no doubt that in these last years a great step toward the unification of spirit has been made. The fatherland has again found itself bound together from north to south, from the continent to the generous islands, which will never be forgotten, from the metropolis of the active colonies of the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean. Do not, gentlemen, address more vain words to the nation. 52 applications to speak upon my message to Parliament are too many. Let us, instead of talking, work with pure heart and ready mind to assure the prosperity and the greatness of the country. May God assist me in bringing to a triumphant end my hard labor. I do not believe that, since 1870, the Hall of Montecitorio had heard energetic and clear words. They burned with a passion deep in my being. In that speech, there was the essence of my old and my recent wrestling with my own mind and my own soul. More than one deputy had to repress the rancor generated by my deserved reproaches, but my exposition in Parliament was rewarded by the approval of the whole of Italy. I was looking beyond that old hall of parties of petty power and of politicians. I was speaking to the entire nation. It listened to me, and it understood me. My political instinct told me that from that moment there would rise, with increasing truth and with increasing expansion of fascist activity, the dawn of new history for Italy, and perhaps dawn on a new path of civilization.
This concludes today's reading of my autobiography, by Benito Mussolini. Join us also the day after tomorrow for the subsequent part. Subscribe to Major Intonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.